The Rise and Shine podcast series is made possible by the generous support of Bonnie Vozar of Chicago, Illinois.
It's very confusing, like what success looks like as a mother. But what I want to invite people to ask themselves is, what does boundary setting feel like? When does stepping back feel the hardest? And if you're not able to step back yet, ask yourself what it would take to try.
This is Rise and Shine, a podcast that offers timeless wisdom and uplifting meditations to fill your heart, feed your soul, and start your day on a positive note. Here is Adrienne Gold Davis.
Okay, I got to tell everybody a story. One of my kids was in third grade, and he told me he was being bullied at recess and that the kids wouldn't pass the ball to him and let him play basketball. And he wouldn't tell me their names because the school had done an excellent job of teaching them the laws of lashon hara, of evil speech, like we talked about last week. So he would describe his misery to me in detail, but he refused to tell me who the kids were. And he's probably very smart. So one day, like a loser, I drove the long 1-hour trek to his school, and I stood in the bushes during recess, okay? And I saw exactly what he was talking about, and I decided it was my job to step in and talk to those kids. So I walked right up to these little brats, and I said, "Why are you refusing to share the ball with the other kids? That's not good behavior in this school. And we say you can't play here. It's not right to leave kids out." Okay, like an infant. And my son pretended, not for the first or the last time, that he had no idea who I was. And he laughed and he took off to another corner of the school. What happened was a teacher came up to me. She asked me to leave the playground. She said, "You have no business interfering with the kids at recess." And she sent me away with my tail between my legs. And she didn't know who I was either, thankfully. But I have always tended towards being a helicopter mother. I just have. I can't bear the idea of one of my kids being hurt. I try to preempt everything, but I stepped over so many lines that day. And the problem is, being a mother can make us believe that in the name of love, you can cross all kinds of boundaries. And while my kids are now grown and flown, to this day, I have to sit on my hands and bite my tongue when they talk to me about what's going on. That's painful for them. So what I want to speak about today are appropriate boundaries in parenting and in life. For example, now, again, I get to speak with Jessica Berkowitz. We'll unpack this together. So you remember Jessica's a writer and a ritualist and a liturgist committed to the discipline of delight. Before she came to Momentum, where she is now the senior education specialist, she was actually part of the founding team of One Table. She served there as director of Jewish learning for 7 years. She's an alumna of Washington University in St. Louis and Baltimore Hebrew University. She got rabbinic ordination at the Jewish Theology Seminary. And you know me, I'm a truth seeker and a truth speaker. And we really hope that our conversations make you feel seen and heard and not so alone, because as we say at Momentum, together we can do so much more. So let's do it together. Jessica. Hi, honey.
Hi, Adrienne. Thank you again for having me back.
Oh, gosh, you know what? I'm enjoying this so much. This might have to become a permanent thing, Jessica. I'm just saying, because
I like every week.
Please, I would love that. Maybe we'll do that. Boundary setting with our kids, actually, and I know you have a little, grows increasingly difficult as they get older. So I really wished I had studied this when mine were small, but it's not too late for the rest of our listeners. So let's start with kids your daughter's age. Maybe you can share some Jewish principles that support the import of boundaries.
Right. So my daughter is 7, and I love that you shared a story of actually being the creeper in the bushes at the playground. Adrienne, that was like the most Adrienne story. And it's also good because I am the exact opposite. So my parenting style is very hands-off. I don't helicopter to the point that other mothers in my daughter's friend group have said something to me about it. What do you mean you let them go for a walk? What do you mean you let them cross the street? So it's a good dynamic because we're representing different sort of poles here.
Okay.
And I think the first thing with kids my daughter's age, so if you have littles or elementary age kids,
Okay.
that is also applicable to older kids and to relationships in general, is to name how love can sometimes lead to overstep. So we talked about a little bit in our previous episode about the importance of intention in Judaism, in Jewish life, in Jewish text. And there's this concept in Judaism called Gevul, which means a boundary. And we are instructed from the Torah on to take boundaries seriously. So much so that it says in Deuteronomy that you should not move your neighbor's boundary, that you should respect the boundaries of others. And what this means is both literal and metaphorical, right? Like, don't plant a tree that's going to hang over your neighbor's house.
Right.
And metaphorically, respect the space and what belongs to someone else, including your 7-year-old's emotional space. So what's the confusion here for us as parents? And what question can we ask ourselves to demarcate these boundaries? A great question is, are you looking to protect, or are you looking to relieve your own discomfort?
Oh my gosh, that's the question. Okay, I have to tell you, speaking honestly to you, friend to friend, that I can tell you that I think I said I was trying to protect, but really, I could not bear my own discomfort around him being in pain.
Okay.
Wow.
And that is so often the case because it's actually, Baruch Hashem, relatively rare that our children are in physical danger, that they're actually in danger. Your child was experiencing emotional danger, psychological danger, but he was safe.
I'm going to push back. I don't even think it was danger. I think it might have been a fundamental truth of what it means to be in social situations where there will be rejection and people who sort of step over your rights. But he was too young to be able to fight that on his own.
Well, that's the thing. Are we giving our kids the tools to be able to encounter those situations on their own? And it turns out that we're not, because and I think this is a hot button issue, but I'm going to name it anyway, because I think it's the natural sort of extrapolation of what happens when we intervene too much on behalf of our young children, that we end up with a generation of college kids who can't read literature because it triggers them. Okay. Now, listen, triggering is real, but what happens when you're triggered is not physical danger. It's emotional and psychological reaction.
Discomfort.
Exactly. Your body is having a physical reaction to emotional or psychological discomfort. You are not actually in any danger. But because we don't have so many of our young adults don't have the tools to deal with that emotional and psychological discomfort, they end up putting the book down. So they stop teaching whatever, Madame Bovary is a great example. That's
Okay. Why?
My first go-to, because it makes people uncomfortable to talk about the context of relationships and Madame Bovary, because we haven't dealt with putting ourselves and putting our children in the position of dealing with emotional and psychological discomfort on their own. So let's talk about how we do that. What could you have done to support your son without intervening on his behalf? And are those the right boundaries? Now, of course, I want to say before we continue the conversation, there are, unfortunately, instances when you need to intervene. If your child, God forbid, is in danger, obviously, you intervene. You cross boundaries to protect no matter what. It's very clear in Jewish life, in Jewish text, and as in a Western social context. But that's not actually what we're going to talk about here. We're talking about different kinds of boundaries, not physical danger. I just want to be really clear there.
Okay, good. All right. Yeah. All
So
right.
what could you have done?
Well, I suppose I could have said to him, would you like me to come to school and speak to the recess monitor so that she's aware of it and she can handle it? I could have asked him that.
So that is a fascinating potential intervention. Adrienne, I love Judaism because it brings up another Jewish concept. This is just, you don't even have to have notes because it's so effortlessly Judaism and Jewish text has so effortlessly given us these tools to encounter. So the next step, right, is about what Judaism might refer to as the paradox of containment. And we have what's called the idea of an Eruv.
Right.
Are you familiar with the Eruv, Adrienne?
Yes, I am, especially when it goes down in, an Eruv is the boundary that's supposed to create space for connection, not isolation, is, I believe, the way you put it.
Yeah. So the Eruv exists so that we can create a difference between kinds of spaces that we exist in. So we have private space in the home. We have public space that's shared public space in a community that has a boundary of the Eruv, right? And it allows us to do things like carry on Shabbat and move objects and do different things. If you're interested in this, it's quite esoteric, but I am happy to talk about it. Shoot me an email. So the Eruv is also a metaphor in Jewish life, and it creates space for connection, but also boundaries. So very clearly, what I would say is that there is an Eruv between your home life with your kid and your kid's life at school. And so when you ask your child, do you want me to come and talk to the recess monitor? You're crossing an Eruv. You're crossing.
No, I'm not. I asked him if I could cross it.
Okay, fine. What do you think he would have said?
No.
Right. And why do you think he would have said no?
Because it would have been humiliating. He wanted someone to complain to about it, but he didn't want it fixed because that would make him look weak.
Okay. So then the question becomes, if you can't cross the spatial, physical Eruv, how do you build an emotional or relational Eruv for you and your son that holds space for connection, but also doesn't trap or make people feel overly contained? And again, it is a paradox. I get it. And it's tricky. It's complicated. So let's revisit the bullying story. Okay.
Great. So glad I shared it with everybody.
I know, right? It's a great story.
Yeah, right.
Let's revisit Adrienne creeping in the bushes.
Okay, thanks, Jessica. Next, yes.
So we're going to revisit the bullying story, and we have this idea of Gevul, we have boundaries, and we have this idea of Eruv that we're going to create. That's a bit of a paradox, that we're going to create space for connection that also serves as a boundary.
All right.
So you mentioned something really important when you were telling the story, which is your child wouldn't tell you the names of the other kids, and that this was an expression of his internalized Jewish values of not speaking Lashon Hara, of not naming names, of not engaging in potentially like evil speech.
Right.
So my question for you as a parent, with boundaries, with Gevul, with Eruv in mind, is when is not knowing actually an act of respect and trust?
Wow. Jess, the new Momentum book, The Art and Practice of Living Wondrously?
I have already pre-ordered a copy for myself and for my mother as a gift.
So you should just know that I write the first article in it, and it is talking about making friends with your adult children. And it deals with this kind of notion in many ways through the lens of Rabbi Manis Friedman's book, Doesn't Anyone Blush Anymore? Mm-hmm. But basically what it says, or what my premise was there, is that sometimes the best way to get close is to look away.
Wait, can you say that again?
Sometimes the best way to get close is to look away. And is that what you mean? When is showing actually an act of respect or trust, not trying to catch somebody at their worst, not staring at the things that they don't want to have focused on, instead of ripping off their mask as some sort of act of love, instead helping them hold it up, like, Eleanor Rigby, who kept her face in a jar by the door. Is that what you mean?
I do. It's such a succinct, elegant way of saying that not all knowledge is necessary or even good. And that as parents, sometimes our restraint is the best possible wisdom.
Wow. I was so not wise. And yet I wasn't a kid, Jessica. I had, I think at this time I was 42, 43 when I did it to this kid. Can you imagine?
I can, because I am 43 and sometimes I feel like I have to physically restrain myself not to intervene on my daughter's behalf when she's in pain. Letting her feel those feelings is one of the hardest and most painful things that I do as a parent.
What do you say to yourself? What is your self-talk when you have to like bite your tongue and sit on your hands kind of thing? So that you don't end up in the bushes over fun.
My God.
Oh my
I'm just never going to let that go.
Never told anybody, so don't use this against me.
Okay, I won't, but only because I love you and I respect the laws of Lashon Hara. I've never told anyone except the thousands of people that listen to this podcast.
No, I'm telling it now because I think that it really indicates when I started struggling with boundaries. Now, part of the reason I can discuss this with you now, Jessica, is because I've spent the last 15 years of my life working on this stuff, but nobody talked to me about this when they were little. And that's why I want us to have this conversation.
I think generationally we're in a different place. And I think millennial parents, and Gen X, younger Gen X and elder millennial parents are in a different space than I think you were at the same age, in that it is
boomer.
I may be calling you a young boomer. Love you. In that, like, I think we are better attuned, and all those tens of thousands of dollars spent on therapy, right? That we are better attuned to question whether our desire to know or our desire to intervene is rooted in service of the child or in our own anxiety and our own desire to fix it. If I could say one thing that seems to be universal about Jewish mothers is, from a good place, our desire to fix it, because we are so incredibly capable, right? And because in so many other aspects of our lives, we do it, we fix it, and we fix it well, right? And so to restrain that part of ourselves, to practice what we might call a kind of tzimtzum, right? Which is, are you familiar with this concept of tzimtzum? How would you describe it?
I would describe it as something that God modeled by shrinking him, her, itself. I'm obviously anthropomorphizing, but it's the idea of contracting to make space for the other.
Right. So one of the things I love about Jewish prayer is that we often conceptualize our relationship with Hashem, our relationship with God, our relationship with a power greater than ourselves, whatever you want to call that, in terms of a parental relationship. Most famously, perhaps in Avinu Malkeinu, our parent, our father, that we're appealing and contextualizing this relationship in terms of parenting, which means if you sort of push that idea, that Jewish liturgy, Jewish prayer is inviting us to understand God's parenting style. And tzimtzum, this concept of contraction, is this idea that God makes space for us, that God contracts God's self in the process of creation so that we have free will to engage in the repair of the world and to, unfortunately, a lot of times, it feels unfortunate, make mistakes and feel pain and feel not enoughness. And it is through that process that we are able to recognize and grow in the image of Hashem. And that's a spiritual model for parenting.
Actually, Jessica, as you discuss this God's parenting style and this practice of tzimtzum, I actually think that this is also applicable in romantic relationships. I think that some of the boundaries that we cross with our children are similar ones that we cross when we love someone. We believe we have the right to know everything and the famous cliche, "What are you thinking, dear?"
Oh God.
It's not really any of our business. And the fact is, when we love someone, whether it's our child or our spouse, we need to contract in some way in order to ensure that the other human being has the autonomy and the ability to, raise their hand and say no further. And I don't know that. I just wonder whether the way we cross boundaries with our children and the way we cross boundaries with those that we love are not related to something you said last week, which is like a lack of anava, humility, and a lack of ahava, a lack of really understanding what love is.
So I think that if you had to say, like, if you were going to build an Eruv, like a metaphorical Eruv that's emotional, psychological, and spiritual, what would that Eruv be built out of? And I think the answer is anava and ahava. That the Eruvim in our lives that we seek to create, that the boundaries that matter most in our relationships are foundationally constructed from love and humility. And that makes it really hard. And that's why the third sort of pillar here has to be tzimtzum, because the essence of tzimtzum is not minimizing the self, it's creation through contraction. So can we practice holding a kind of presence with our kids, allowing them to feel those feelings instead of rushing in to fix them? Can we withdraw so that we have a strong gevul, a strong boundary? Can we create that emotional eruv as an act of love?
Listen, I know you're right. I'm just going to tell you another thing that, because, obviously it's just you and I and the thousands of others. Yeah. The greatest gift I ever gave my husband was I stopped asking him when he was going to be home. Because it somehow, what he needs more than, actually I need it too, which is probably why I was having such a hard time giving it. But when I stopped asking him when he was going to be home, stopped driving him crazy about where are you, what are you doing, he had much more of a desire to come home.
Oh.
And I actually think that might be true of our children. And I can tell you, as an adult, parent with adult children, when I started practicing these principles that you are sharing now, my kids started to come home again. And I guess my blessing for everyone who is listening is that the absolute pleasure of practicing these principles that you, Jessica, have shared with us today. Because if you really want an empty nest to be intermittently filled and filled with joy, these are the principles you have to learn. And you need to learn them early, not at 50 like I did, but, when you have your children and they're young.
Amen.
Wow. So do you have any closing reflection ideas that you can sort of leave us with for this week?
Yeah, I have a few questions that I think certainly helped me in this process, and it is a process. So for example, my daughter is 7, her best friend is 8. And when they are together, I let them play outside in our neighborhood without supervision. I let them go for walks. And I give them a time that they have to be home. And one thing I've noticed that I think echoes what you were just saying about the joy of the nest of the bird coming home is that when I gave her that responsibility of being home at a particular time, she flourished and her behavior elevated in that moment because I was giving her this amazing freedom and responsibility, and she rose to the occasion. But I want to be really honest that it felt scary or it felt like I was doing something wrong because we live in a society where you're supposed to essentially follow your kids around. It's very confusing, like what success looks like as a mother. But what I want to invite people to ask themselves is, what does boundary setting feel like in your body? And to notice when you're feeling that tension of like, I'm letting my kid do something or work something out on their own, and honor that feeling in yourself. And even consider meditating on it or journaling on it to ask yourself this question of, when does stepping back feel the hardest? And if you're not able to step back yet, ask yourself what it would take to try.
You know what, Jessica? I do hope that everyone listening takes your advice. Otherwise, my friends in the Rise and Shine world, you might find yourself in the suburban jungle, hiding in the bushes, overfunctioning and being sent away by the recess monitor. I've shared my humiliation with you to save you from the same. I'll speak to you.
Adrienne, I love it. It's such good advice. Thank you so much.
God bless you. We'll speak to each other next week, God willing.
Thanks for listening to Rise and Shine. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Momentum Podcasts on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Join Adrienne again next time for more timeless wisdom and uplifting meditations that fill your heart, feed your soul, and start your day on a positive note.
This podcast was made possible by the generous support of Bonnie Vozar of Chicago, Illinois. Spread the wisdom. Inspire Jewish individuals around the globe by supporting Momentum's podcasts. To sponsor, contact podcast@momentumunlimited.org. You're listening to a Momentum podcast. For unlimited inspiration, wisdom, and empowerment, visit momentumunlimited.org.